Hi, I'm Femi OK. Thanks for watching the stream. The school year in India has just got started, and for students who are aged 16 years and under, their curriculum will be somewhat smaller. Let me tell you what won't be there. Theory of evolution, gone. Climate change issues, gone. And also some references to India's Muslim historical past have also gone. Now, the Education Ministry says this is to help students who are still struggling because of the COVID pandemic and they're falling behind. Government critics say that this is the politicisation of textbooks. What do you say? Please weigh in. Our comment section on YouTube is live. With us today, three guests in India. In New Delhi, Shrishti Jaswal, a journalist who's been writing about India's textbook revisions for Al Jazeera. In Vijayawada, Basvanth Uraganti, a professor of chemistry at SRM University. And in Pundri, Sudhanshura Kaushik, founder of the Young India Foundation. Good to have you all here, guests. I am going to start with a statistic that will make you stop and pause. For youngsters aged 12 to 18, so that's classes 6 to 12, 30% of their syllabus this year has disappeared. Now, the process of cutting back on the school syllabus, it's happened since the pandemic, and last year the material for the classes was removed to help the children kind of catch up because they'd fallen behind. Shrishti, what is now, I referenced a couple of things that won't be in the syllabus for youngsters at the moment. What has gone and has caused controversy?
Actually, it's not just this year that we have seen revision in syllabus, but it is happening for quite some time, especially after 2018 onwards. Initially, what they did was that they made subjects like democracy or other important subjects which is related to India's Muslim past. They made it optional for students to study, like it was not tested in the examination, but it was still in the textbooks. However, after the COVID pandemic, in the name of rationalization, they even purged it from the textbooks. And even though they purged it, they created a list of material that was removed in the name of rationalization. But there have been certain removals which is not even listed to the public domain. For instance, Mahatma Gandhi, who is the father of Indian nation, the information about his assassin was not listed in the rationalization exercise. Similarly, India's first education minister, Maulana Azad, his names have been removed in the textbooks. It was also not listed in the rationalization exercise. So a lot of changes have been ad hoc. A lot of changes have been unannounced, and that even gives it a bit of shady thing. Like, if they have to do it, if there is a process, who are the people who are consulted? Can they give us the name of scientists or educators who have recommended that evolution should be removed? Can they give us the names of people who have recommended that periodic table should be removed from the curriculum? But they are not able to produce any of these things. They do say that, yes, this is for lowering down the burden of students after 2 harsh years of pandemic. But again, there is not enough weight in their argument.
Let me just check into Sudhanshu. How are students faring after, the pandemic that started in 2020 and now we're 2023? What has that done to the student population? How are they managing to study?
Yeah, Femi, absolutely. So I'm actually about 500 yards away, right next door to a CBSE school that I have, grown acquainted for since, being brought up here in the summers and in the winters. The thing is, it's not just a post-pandemic thing. This issue of the burden of trying to memorize and understand a breadth of information and not to actually digest it, but the method of regurgitation has been, ensuing, and there have been so many players and stakeholders who've been trying to bring reform to this. And I think with the NEP 2020 that came into kind of fruition after several years of kind of back and forthness, engaging with stakeholders, one of the biggest push was to decrease that mental workload that these students at a very young age have been facing, not just now, not just after 2019 or 2014, but consistently. And one of the things that, that we understood is that most of the practitioners on ground. So I spoke with the principal of the school next door right before this interview in the morning. It's summer vacations right now, but they're prepping for next year's.
Yeah.
Two really big things came out. One was that, why is this a controversy? And I was like, what do you mean? It's all over the news. It's like, but us practitioners, we've been going through this for the past 20, 25 years. He's been teaching at the school and now at an administrative leadership for, I think he said 25 years. And he said, every year we have revisions. We're told to say this, told to do this, etc. The implementation of it, I think, depends on the actual school at that point.
Sudhanshu, are the revisions as controversial as taking out the theory of evolution? Because that's a lot of information for the students to take in. Are they as controversial as maybe taking out climate change issues? Have they been the revisions for the past 25 years?
So, that's really interesting. And I think there's been a lot of back and forthness. I don't think climate change itself, from what I understood from the principal, was actually even introduced until very recently and then taken out in some aspects.
Sure.
So I think there's been a back and forth since, I would say, 2004 in these issues. And I will agree that, something as instrumental as evolution being taken out is symbolic and also controversial, but let's compare it. It's been happening so much. So I also, studied at a CBSE school, but also in Alabama. I was, taught abstinence in a public school. I wasn't taught Darwin's theory, by the way, until I think 11th or 12th grade, much later on. And even though I disappointed my mom of not becoming a doctor, I still turned out okay in that aspect.
You're a bad son.
But I think there's always been this issue. Overall.
Baswant, you teach chemistry, so I want to talk about science. But first of all, from a teacher's perspective, what does rationalization really mean from a teacher's perspective?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to share my experience for the past 2 weeks. I have been interacting with so many students. I have conducted Viva Voice examination, during which I was discussing with students what are the problems they are facing after the pandemic. So most of the students are of the opinion that they lack basic understanding. They are lacking in fundamentals. So some students, I see that they don't understand what is an acid, what is a base, what is a metal, what is a non-metal. So these kind of basic understanding they are lacking.
Yes. And
they fear that they want to by heart the periodic table. They're saying that chemistry is all about memorization because they need to by heart periodic table, they need to by heart IUPAC rules and so on. So that fear they get of chemistry due to a lot of memorization.
What do you tell them? How do you encourage them?
Yes, I'm coming to that. So rather than asking them to memorize the names of elements or order of the elements, instead of that, we should focus on the core essential concepts and principles and how they can use that to solve problems, or how they can use those concepts to improve their thinking abilities. So this is what the prime focus of national educational policy. So they say that instead of overloading them with content, focus on core essentials, the basic principles and concepts, and then teach them how to apply that and solve problems. So this is the core thing I want to say. Like, this is my personal experience. I interacted with almost 250 students in last 2 weeks, and many are of this opinion that due to the pandemic, their learning suffered a lot.
I want to ask you, chemistry professor, about some of the topics that have been rationalized, and I still want to ask what that really means from a teacher's perspective. But let's look at the topics that have been cut from year 10 of science and mathematics. So year 10, 16-year-olds. So let's take a look here. Evolutionary biology, the periodic table, as Baswant was telling us, and Pythagorean theorem, those have gone. Do you think that's going to help your students, Baswant?
Yeah, particularly I want to focus on the periodic table aspect.
Yes.
So as I have said, instead of just asking them to memorize this, first focus on what is the underlying concept of the periodic table. What is the underlying concept behind the classification of elements? These are still existing at class 9 and class 10 levels. So once they get used to the concepts and principles, then it is natural for them to think that, okay, can we classify these elements? They can come up with their own methods of classification. So this is what I mean by rationalization. So you
So
restructure
if you looked at this periodic table that I've just put up now, it's just, I'm triggered. I've gone back to being a 15-year-old at school. If you looked at this now, you know, you've memorized, you know that entire periodic table, but your students do not.
Yeah, even I can't remember all the elements of the periodic table. I just know some of the elements. It's difficult for anyone to remember all the elements of the periodic table. So that's what I'm saying. Instead of just asking them to memorize, tell the concept that the underlying concept is elements having same number of valence electron belong to a specific group and they have similar properties. This is the underlying concept. If we teach them in class 10, then they can construct their own model of periodic table.
Sudhanshu, go ahead.
I think Basant has this interesting point where there is an evolution in terms of how teaching is being done in India. We, you know, in the West have had a very practical exposure, whether it's, you know, physically using our hands and the things that we're doing in a chemistry lab or a physics lab, or whether it's the actual even academic curriculum that we're taught. And the experience that I've had growing up and people that I've spoken to within and you know, Shrishti and Basant are more able to answer this. You know, it's very based on what Basant was saying was memorization. How do I make sure that I know exactly that periodic table of elements?
Sorry for jumping in between, but I would also like to add that one of the very major points that I want to bring in is that Indian government has not put forward any names of people who have recommended these changes and the reasons behind it. Yes, they are saying this is for a new education policy after the COVID, but at least they should make names of the people public who have recommended these changes and why they have done so. Because every time there have been changes in NCERT books, it has followed a suit. There has been a process. India's leading academicians are actually involved in the process. There's debate, there's discussion, a healthy discussion around it.
So, Shrishti, as I understand, there was a textbook committee that looked at the textbooks and then revised them. Who was on that textbook committee?
So a textbook committee comprised of really eminent people, but I confirmed with all of them, nobody was informed that these changes are being made out.
Let's talk about the
committee
impact.
Members told me that they were not kept in loop about
All right, so the changes have been made already. This is this new school year already. I love that Basvant would put his hand up like we're at school. Basvant, your hand is up. Go ahead.
I have a point here. Actually, I would like to add that. So NCERT states that this is an interim strategy to help students improve their learning due to the after effects of COVID. And they are in the process of formulating completely new textbooks based on recommendations in National Educational Policy.
All right, let's talk then about the impact that this is having on students and what teachers think about this. So this is Professor Emeritus Bao, who spoke to us a little bit earlier. Have a listen, have a look.
Present government is actually attacking science and rationality in multiple ways. Earlier Minister of Education actually criticized evolution, saying that he hasn't seen a monkey turning into a human being and hence questioned evolution. This is not something that should be conveyed to the younger people of this country. And I think the current government is trying to look backwards into mythology, into Hindu scriptures to provide irrational thinking for the next generation, which is extremely dangerous.
Sudhanshu, what I was thinking here was maybe we've gone back to that old, very classic conversation, religion versus science. Is that what's going on there? Go ahead.
You know, I hope not. I sincerely hope not, because then we're in a trajectory that we don't want to be in. I do think that, you know, there is controversy. And as, you know, the emeritus professor said, you know, there have been political figures who have made these very inappropriate, I would say, remarks at certain points. But I think at the end of the day, can we trace this back, let's say, to those two certain politicians making those remarks and the juncture of removing it now? Because I think the compulsions of doing so at this point are not because of this push to have a certain you know, ideology or framework in mind, as is unfortunately very, very common in
I
India
think,
whenever
Sudhanshu, I
there's a
would
new
just
political
like
government.
to,
But
sorry for jumping in, but I would like to point it out. This is what Al Jazeera actually reported on. We were first to report that evolution was removed, and the removal came just a year after the statement of India's former education minister, who said this particular statement that nobody has seen a man coming from an ape.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So,
I have a point here.
yeah, and
Actually,
there
it's
has
not
been a
removed. They have
correlation. So
just
India's
shifted it.
education
Baswant,
minister saying
allow
something.
Shrishti just to finish her sentence and then you go ahead. Shrishti, finish your sentence.
You cannot take, I'll just continue. So you cannot take statement of India's education minister lightly. He heads the department. He's making that statement, and after making that statement, that particular concept was removed. First, it was removed from the examination, then it was completely purged from the books. Nobody has come out with an explanation why that has been done so far. And of course, there are a lot of alarming evidence to that. In Indian Science Congress, a professor actually said that the theory of Dashavatar, which says that Vishnu's reincarnation in certain forms, is the better theory than Darwin's evolution theory.
So that is
if
that
they have
classic
these claims
debate
to make-
between religion and science existing at the same time.
Yeah.
Baswant, I'm going
I
to let
have
you
a
come in
point
here.
here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing, the Darwin's theory of evolution is not removed, but it's actually shifted to class 12. So this is one point I disagree with my panelists. And then the other thing, so she was saying that
I will also
one
like to
professor.
point out, so sorry, but I think
Shrishti,
you have misinformed him.
let Baswant
Just-
finish his thought and then you can come right
Yeah.
back.
So she also said that, so one professor pointed out that Dashavatara also have similar ideas. So if similar ideas are there, why would anyone want to remove the concept of evolution?
All right, so let me just show
So,
here. Let
one
me
thing,
just
in the
show
school-
our audience just so they can keep up with our conversation. This is NCERT. So this is the education body who sets the curriculum on a country level, on a national level, and they are pushing back with some of the complaints about this rationalization of the curriculum. For instance, the periodic table has not been removed from school education, but is in fact available in great detail in Unit 3, and then they go on. So it's really about the age of the students rather than the content of the curriculum. But there are some issues that some teachers are bringing up. They seem to be stuck on this idea about evolution and are incensed that it should be removed from the curriculum at age 16 and under. This is Associate Professor Badra, who talked to us a little bit earlier. Have a listen, have a look.
If you remove the concept of evolution from biology textbooks up to class 10, there would be many students who would never study biology ever after that. When they go to high school, they choose to go into different disciplines, and such students will have a very, very distorted, very, very incomplete understanding of biology. Evolution is really the philosophical thread that ties all biology together.
Baswant, you explained how for your student it's going to really help them to understand the science before they have to just memorize a whole periodic table. But there must be some very basic parts of science that they need to know in order to understand chemistry. What about understanding the theory of evolution so that you can understand biology? Do you see that that is an issue?
Yeah, I agree that concept of evolution is very fundamental to understand the origin of life. So I do think that it should be there in before class 10. I mean, it should be there in class 10. But one thing we need to keep in mind here is, as NCERT says, this is a interim strategy to reduce the burden on students. Probably when they come up with new textbooks, I really hope that they'll put it back into class 10 because it's a really central concept to understand biology.
Sudhanshu, from your talking to the students who are local to you, what is the feedback that you're getting? Are they feeling less stressed with their workload now?
Look, it's too early, right? And look, there has been a constant process. What's happened is that there have been a substantial increase of failure and dropout rates post-COVID, not just in primary education, but senior secondary as well, when a lot of this issue comes in. So I think I agree when Shrishti is speaking about the causations here, the provoking of an idea and the after effect of it, being disincluded in some of these textbooks is clear. You can't, segregate it. But there's also a nuance of the fact that this isn't post just 2022, the statement being made, right? There was a concentrated effort by both successive NDA governments from 2014 onwards to create a new national education policy. Sure. And one of the biggest things that they wanted to tackle was the mental workload that students had to face, right? So they've been working on this since 2014. The HRD ministry that was then changed into the education ministry had this as their focal agenda. So if a minister makes that statement, which, is not okay, right? But at the same time, it's what you're thinking is this is a much concentrated effort, and it's a more positive effort holistically, if you think about it, to make sure that we don't have an increase of youth suicides based off of education, because at this point, India does have that, right? It's a constant effort to make sure that instead of just being a what my mom calls rattamar, or just memorization of education, we have people that are actually critically thinking. And Baswan makes this incredible point when in his article as well, and when he's talking about it, is that understanding the fundamentals is substantially more important, and it gives you a more holistic approach into other subjects. And I think if we do lessen this, the subject itself, it would be substantially good. But the problem is, the issue is that what is being taken out? So if you have a substantial amount of content being taken out that is part of a certain identity or part of certain political narrative, then there are reforms that need to be made in that. But what I want to stress again, that's not something that's new to India. Okay. It's been happening every successive government. And the biggest failure, though, because we harp on this controversy, but we move on to the next one. Who's harmed most? Students. Yeah. For the past 20 years, the principal that I spoke with was saying not a single person, not a single student or year has had the same curriculum consequentially, right? So every single year, someone is theoretically taught different things.
Interesting. And it is possible for two things to happen at the same time, for modernization and for education to understand that students learn in a different way, and for the textbooks to be political in nature. Both of those things can happen at the same time. One more professor I want to bring into the conversation, and this is Professor Banerjee. Have a listen and have a look.
The scientific community in India is opposing this decision because the lack of exposure to the idea of evolution will stand in the way of development of a scientific rational thinking. Through learning evolution, one gets to know that the world has not been the same all through history. We'll get to know that organisms evolve. They evolve following law-governed process without any divine intervention. We get to know that the whole of humanity, irrespective of race and color, are the same species. And all these are essential components of development of a scientific bent of mind.
All right, guess I'm going to quiz you immediately. I'm going to give you a question of thought and you have to come back to me straight away. Adnan says, India is totally changing the concepts of Mughals and the Muslim sultans from history. Thoughts, Srishti, in a sentence, very quickly.
I think, it's very unfair what is happening with the students, because instead of actually being guided in a positive way, they don't know what's being thrown on them and what's being removed.
All right, so Will says, Indian is backsliding in the eyes of the world again through these proposals. That's controversial. Sudhanshu, quick response back, please.
I think we've had consistent backsliding, and what we need to do is reform the system so that the government can be competitive in its CBSE curriculum with this onslaught of ed tech, that the rationalization occurs, etc., to give more access to these students in a more equitable manner.
Professor Bansvanth, H in the periodic table of elements, what does it stand for?
Hydrogen.
V, what does V stand for?
Vanadium.
Oh my goodness. All right. 2 out of 2. Excellent. Thank you so much for really helping us understand what rationalization means in India with the current curriculum for youngsters aged 16 and under. Sudhanshu, Basvanth and Srishti, you get an A+. Viewers, thanks very much for being part of our program today. I'll see you next time. Take care.